Coming up, the New York Football Giants snatch defeat from the jaws of victory and boost their draft odds in the process. We dive into it all coming up next. Yes, my friends, it's OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where you know that we are your host. Over here, Adam Marmot, over there, Andrew Makowitz. We're healthy, wealthy, and wise. The New York Football Giants, maybe not so much. Obviously, a injury-filled roster for the Giants over the weekend. They lose to the Saints at home, 14-11 on a very Giants-like play. Blocked field goal attempt to send it to overtime. We'll get into all the details. Does this change? Will this change the perception of Brian Daboll and the security of jobs through in this organization? We'll mention the plane in the sky and everything else in between, Andy. But at a high level, how did you feel? Did you care? Did you not care? Did you go like some fans? Silver lining? Sure. They kick the field goal and tie it. Great. We'll go to overtime and see what happens. But it gets blocked. And now the Giants sit atop the draft order just behind Vegas, but only two teams remaining with just 2 wins.
I was watching that game and I was excited because of what was happening around the league and everything else. The Giants were an act of futility on offense. Then all of a sudden, Smith-Marsette gets a punt return for a touchdown. I'm like, oh, a little window dressing at the end, just like the Cowboys game. No problems here. And then the Giants get stopped. I'm like, oh, the game's over. Oh, wait, they have timeouts. Oh, wait, the Giants get the ball back. Oh, wait, on 4th and 10, Drew Lock is pretending to be Lamar Jackson and run down the sideline. I'm like, hold on a second here. This could be a problem. And I actually looked around the room and I said, I know it sounds bad, but I really hope that Graham Gano misses this kick because the Giants have no business winning this game. And the way I was thinking about it, Adam, is obviously Derek Carr goes down with a broken arm / wrist / hand injury on one of the last plays of the game. And I'm thinking to myself, if the Giants make this field goal, they might mess around and actually win a game that they have business winning. And it actually would have been one of the few times where I would have been upset at a Giants victory. Did you feel the same way as he was getting ready to kick that field goal?
Well, because it's non-reflective of the game, right? So you and I talk about this all the time when it comes to, again, beyond the idea of tanking and wanting to have a high pick to do whatever you want with next year. We've come to terms with that for sure. But when you're watching the game, if the team is playing well and you feel like, hey, we've earned a chance to win this football game, then I'm fine with it, right? I'm fine with them kicking the game time field goal, going to overtime and seeing what happens. But when you look at this game and you know that it was not that type of script for the Giants, that they had no business, as you said, winning this game. They didn't deserve to be in this game. They were absolutely a mess across the board, including to the tune of, I want to make sure I get the number right, 12 penalties for 112 yards. You mentioned the special teams touchdown, without which the Giants don't score a touchdown in this game. So that is where, at the end of it, I think maybe your point, it's like, yeah, you kind of deserve it. And then there's everything else that goes with it. Fans rejoicing, great. You keep the tank on track, all that stuff. That's all well and good. It has real impact, but this very much felt like you get what you deserve, and the Giants deserve to lose this game. Frankly, I think the Saints deserve to get an extra touchdown in here and feel a little bit better about their game, right? It should have been a 21-11 game going away with nothing really on the line down the stretch. Brutal injury for Derek Carr for them, and you saw, by the way, they were elated to win that game. We talked about this coming in. The Saints, with 4 wins on the season, they want to win games. They want to show that they can still win. Interim head coach, a lot on the line for them down the stretch, unlike the Giants.
Yeah, you could tell the Saints were way more motivated to win this game. I mean, what you saw from Drew Lock out there.
Says a lot about the Saints, by the way. Incredibly motivated to win the game. And it came down to a blocked field goal to get the win. But that's
I mean, that just shows how mediocre to bad the Saints are. But their motivation was to win the game. It's tough because, as you mentioned before, if Drew Lock came out there and threw for 2 touchdown passes, Malik Neighbors had 150 yards, Tyrone Tracy's running all over the place, the defense gets some timely stops and forces a turnover, you and I would both be like, you know what? They showed heart. They showed fight. You can't tell them to tank. You can't tell the players to tank. But that's not what happened. Drew Lock completed 42% of his passes. 42%. And they had him drop back 49 times in a game that they scored 11 points and 0 touchdowns on offense. It was It was embarrassing to watch, to be honest with you. And I was okay with it, Adam, because I sat there and I said, listen, if they came out and, like their hair is on fire and they won the game, so
Sure.
be it. They should not have won that game. I was happy when the kick got blocked and tipped. Very similar to how Isaiah Simmons had blocked the kick against Seattle earlier by jumping over the center. To me, Adam,
Yes.
as the second the game ended, I'm like, short-term pain for long-term gain. And I am glad I did not get that like instant gratification and then 5 minutes later be like, what did we just do here? So for me, all in all, it just reaffirms that Drew Lock won't be here. It reaffirms that we are a very bad team, and it gets us closer to getting one of the top 2 or 3 picks in the NFL draft.
Yeah, 100%. And you look around, obviously, in the rest of the league there, we mentioned Vegas 2-11. They've lost 9 in a row. The Giants have lost 8 in a row, by the way. So it's a real race here. It's neck and neck in terms of disasters. I actually saw Dion telling Antonio Pierce that they need to come get both of his boys and bring him into Vegas. New England, they go out. They were on a bye week here. You get Carolina. They lose their game. So while the Giants got one more spot higher in the tankathon odds overall, with Jacksonville winning their game, you still have 3 through 8 in the draft order sitting there at 3-10 right now. So this is by no stretch over. Although the level of ineptitude from the Giants between injuries and otherwise does make it feel like they are going to be able to steer this ship as hard and aggressively towards the bottom as possible. The irony being that when you have at least one other team in the Vegas Raiders who very much want to accomplish the same thing, if whoever the quarterback is, if that's the agenda, you may still find yourself on the outside looking in when it comes to getting that QB. Is Shedeur Sanders the apple of the Giants' eye, and they're trying to get there? If they come up short, is Cam Ward enough? Do they like him as much? Is it neck and neck? These are the things that you and I talk about when we discuss tank seasons or losing as much as possible. Sometimes you don't quite get to where you want to be. And like I say, as a minimum, with one other team that wants to get a franchise quarterback, you can do all the losing you want. You may still not get there. And that to me is the bitter part about watching the team lose and saying, okay, fine, we want the highest draft pick. You may not still get to the ultimate goal here.
Yeah, Adam, you're right, but that just illustrates to me why it was so important for Giants fans to want to lose these games that hang in the
Sure.
balance like they did at the end of this game. You mentioned it before. Right now, if the Giants won a game, they could pick if they were 3-10. There, as you mentioned, there's a logjam of very bad teams at 3-10. The Giants could be drafting as worse as eighth in the NFL draft. And if the Giants get there, that is literally no man's land. It's kind of like where we sat this past season getting Malik Neighbors. We weren't high enough to get a Drake May, a Jaden Daniels, a Caleb Williams. Every one of these games matters because it is an act of futility for all of these other teams. We're very excited to see Jacksonville pull out that win. That is big for the Giants. The
Yes.
Giants need to continue to lose and lose in spectacular fashion. I think the only question is whether or not that's going to impact longer term who is going to be around here when it's all said and done.
And so, as we turn our attention to the conversation of how do these games impact, if at all, what the front office, what the organization is going to do this offseason, we remind you that this portion of the show is brought to you by Personam. Personam is an AI-driven threat detection search engine that gives you insight into your network security that other platforms simply cannot do. You can check out personam.ai at PERSONAM.ai and make sure that your network is secure. We say that if the tank is on and the goal is to be high picking so you can get your quarterback and nothing is going to change the perception, does anything change your perception? Because it's an honest question. If you and here's what I think it comes down to, and I talk about this all the time across NBA as well. When I talk about the Nets, if you believe in Brian Daboll or you believe in Joe Schoen or you believe in both, then nothing about this matters. You don't care about the games down the stretch. You're not worried about it. You're just trying to get to the offseason and prepare for what's next. If you've had your questions or concerns about them, then this affirms them, right? To me, that is what it feels like, that wherever you sat on it, that's how you're going to garner these last couple of games. If you're in the corner of the regime right now, you're going to sit and say, well, all the injuries, it doesn't really matter. You can't blame Daboll for the penalties. It's a lot of guys that aren't supposed to be getting this many reps, right? Like, do you think that this changes? Well, first, does it change anything for you? Let's go on an individual level. Is this changing your perception of coach or GM as this season winds down?
It is not changing my perception of the coach and the GM, but it
What
is
was your perception, Andy?
well, so it's not changing my perception, but what it is it informing me of what can't happen, right? I know that may sound weird. You may be like, Andy, what are you talking about? The Giants
Andy, what
are
are you talking about?
0-7 at home. They have
Yes.
2 more home games, and they could be the first team in NFL history to go 0-9 at home, which is embarrassing. Obviously, we'll talk in a minute. There are planes being flown overhead before games that say literally, Mr. Mara, enough. Please fix this dumpster fire. Then,
Yeah,
Adam, you look at it. The Giants right now, in terms of their offense, is averaging 14.9 points per game. That is dead last in the NFL. It is
that's
less
right.
than last year. And it is a
That's right.
full 2+ points behind teams like New England and Tennessee, who are terrible and are searching for their quarterbacks. So,
This
Adam,
is bad, all-time bad vibes, right? Like, I mean, it's not just bad, it's all-time bad. And that's where I think it's, for me, it's like, it's hard. How are you supposed to say nothing can change here if it's all-time ugly?
yeah, see, Adam, you're starting to go where I'm going. Is like, you can be bad. Don't be
Right.
historically bad, because then it's like you can't be that terrible and be a great coach if you're historically that bad. And I'll give you an example very quickly.
Okay.
Last
Take your time.
year, the Minnesota Vikings lost Kirk Cousins to a ruptured, Achilles heel,
ACL?
right?
Yeah.
He was out. They're pulling guys off the street. They've got Josh Dobbs. They've got Nick Mullins. They're pulling anyone humanly possible off the street. Guy has a day or two notice, and he's putting up 25 points in a win. Adam,
Right.
they lost their last 4 games last year. They still finished 7-10
Yeah.
without Kirk Cousins. And Adam, in their last 4 games, like it wasn't like they were world beaters, but they scored 20, 10, 24, and 24. They kept things going. That was against good teams like the Detroit Lions, right? That was a good team, like against the Bengals, the Packers, the Lions again. Those were like playoff teams that they're losing games, but they're still putting up points and being competitive. I look directly at Kevin O'Connell and I say, that is a great coach that figures out a way when all of his players are hurt to be able to get the most out of the people on his team. And I don't look at Brian Daboll the same way. Do you look at that comparison of Kevin O'Connell last year losing his quarterback similar to what Brian Daboll has had to deal with this year?
I do on a sliding scale, right? Because the Vikings had expectations a year ago, right? They were expected to be a team that was going to make the playoffs and potentially go on a run. So your quarterback goes down. You still want to see that the team is capable of being competitive, of being productive on Sundays, of being in games. So the sliding scale for me when you switch over to the Giants is you go back to, let's go back to Germany, right? So you lose to the Carolina Panthers, who, by the way, Bryce Young back in there. He's shown some things. That's fantastic. You want to see a young player start to show improvement, but you only put up 17 points against one of the worst teams in the league. You turn around 7 points against the Buccaneers, a window dressing score late against the Cowboys, 27-20. They're a bad team this year, no matter how you slice it. And then 11 points with a special team score against another bad team in the New Orleans Saints. So it's not even about the wins or losses here, right? If you went back over these last 4 games and you told me, and again, we understand yesterday with how many players they were holding out, et cetera, the offensive line has gone through a lot of injuries, but that's more short-term stuff than the overall season. But if over these last 4 games you told me you're scoring in the 20s, you're kind of gripping and ripping it, right? You're letting Drew Lock throw 5 interceptions and also throw 3 touchdowns and show the team can do some things offensively. If that was the case and you're still losing, you'd be saying, hey, this is a really rough season. We get it. But look at what we're at least showing we're capable of. So that would be the margin to me. Show you can be competitive. Show you can play smart football. And by the way, even with a lot of backups on the field, show that from a coaching perspective, you prepare your team. We may lose this game 33-17, but we played smart, functional football in the opportunities we had, no penalties, and we just get the talent gap is there and we're going to lose a football game, right? So I do agree with you. It's like Brian Daboll, it has certainly done little over the last month of the season to indicate to me that he is the head coach for the future. And you compound that with the no wins at home. You compound it with all-time bad in terms of points scored per game, right? All of this stuff, and that's what I want to push back to you is, all of these things, I am not a big perception guy. Like when it comes to, hey, you have your vision, you believe in Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, whatever you believe in, John Mayer and the Tisch family, fine, you believe in it. But I'll tell you this, if in the 100th season of the franchise, you have a historically bad season and you stay committed to this regime and they come out and look historically bad again next year, that's like you're in revolt territory at that point, right? Like, so there is a problem from a PR perspective to have this bad of a year unfold and then say, no, wait, it's going to be okay. That's a really hard thing to sell to the fans.
Well, and Adam, you are spot on. It's the 100th year. They do all this stuff, the history, the jerseys, they have everything around it. And the team is historically bad. Like this is going to be one of the worst seasons, if not the worst season in Giants history. Adam, I keep thinking about this. I just keep thinking about other coaches that are offensive minded, that have their quarterback go down or things aren't really working out, and they find a way to make it work. I mean,
of course,
look at Kevin Stefanski for the Cleveland Browns, right? The Deshaun Watson trade has been abysmal. But you know what? They went out this offseason and signed Jameis Winston as their backup for a 1-year, $4 million deal. He's making less money than Drew Lock is. And you may turn around to me and say, Adam, well, listen, it's Jameis Winston. Like he's throwing the ball all over the place. The Giants could have had Jameis Winston, presumably, for the same amount of money that they paid Drew Lock. So my thinking on this is,
and Winston would have liked that because Winston would have viewed the Giants as a more favorable opportunity. Maybe it ends up being able to play because of injury, but they could have had a chance. He would have had a really good chance with everything with Daniel Jones and the Giants.
Right. I mean, it's part of the reason why Jameis chose Cleveland is like Deshaun Watson. He's had injuries. He has all these issues. Why not? We know Daniel Jones has had injuries, and even when he didn't have them, his play was regressing. And they went out and they signed Drew Lock for more money than Jameis Winston. So when I hear, oh, we can't function, Drew Lock's not the guy, and he's completing 42% of the passes, it's like, I wasn't the one that signed up for Drew Lock. Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll got together and said, let's pay Drew Lock this money when Joe Flacco signed a day later for less, when Jameis Winston signed for less. To me, it just feels like these are all excuses. And I kind of turn around and say, why is every other offensive-minded head coach figuring it out? How are they actually being competent? I mean, when you look at the Cleveland Browns, and I'm just doing this because it's just so around the league, everyone else is having the same problems. The Browns put up 32 points against the Denver defense, which is a top 7 defense in the league, with their backup quarterback, Jameis Winston, throwing for almost 500 yards. Like, yes, he threw 2 pick sixes, but to your point, Adam, why is Drew Lock not doing that? Why are we not opening up the playbook for him to throw for 350 yards and just say, our offense is still going to function? To me, there's clearly something that is wrong, whether either it's Joe Schoen's evaluation process of someone like Drew Lock and the allocation of money, or Brian Daboll signing off on Drew Lock as being the backup, knowing there's a very good potential that he is going to play meaningful games based on Daniel Jones' injury history. So again, I kind of turn it back to you to be like, it's historically bad, but other coaches are figuring it out when they're in the face of adversity. Do you chalk it up to, well, those teams are just better teams in general than the Giants? Like, where do you go when you see around the league backup quarterbacks winning football games for their team?
And that's the functional problem here. Like the question of what is it indicative of? Because, okay, maybe it's not the coach. Then it's the GM. Like if the team and the roster isn't functional enough, something doesn't add up here, whether it's buy-in from the players to the way they're being coached, whether it's schematically, as we've talked about before with Shane Bowen and what's gone on defensively for this team, a lot of injuries on the offensive line, all that stuff. But you're in your 3rd year. You've had a lot of these players around. You're trying to build this roster. You can point to some young guys that have been bright spots for the Giants, many of them not playing due to injury down the stretch of this season here. But that, to me, is the issue. And by the way, it's like you're using Cleveland in a good way, and I agree with you. They're 3-10 too. But there's just different ways to lose football games. There's different ways to have a season finish when you've either lost your quarterback due to injury, underperformance, you've benched him and then released him and everything else. You can still show that overall the team is functional. The base of this team is strong. And I don't know. Internally from the Giants side, if we look at it in a very specific way, for the Vegas Raiders, let's say, they didn't come into the season with real high expectations. I don't think we had big ones for the Giants either. But how does their fan base look at the opportunity to tank and to be low, right? You still want to know whether or not. Do you trust Antonio Pierce? And right, wrong, indifferent, Antonio Pierce is another name that you're going to hear about. Does he have problems? Is he on the hot seat? Are they going to be in a position to draft Shedeur Sanders and then say Antonio Pierce, a defensive-minded head coach, is going to be at the helm? Maybe, maybe not. So it's like, on the one hand, I don't think the Giants roster is very good in totality. And the reason why I always come back to it, actually, I thought about this the other day, I think the other week. Remember last year, coming out of it, so many people said, well, remember when they didn't call that penalty on Darren Waller in the back of the end zone? That should have been a win against the Bills. Remember when this one play here and this one play there? And you go, okay, I get it. You can point to those and say they could have been 2 wins better. But for every one of those, the thing you don't do is say, here's 5 plays that maybe broke their way innocuously over the course of the season you forget about. It was a year later. It's a year later. They have 2 wins. Like, I'm sorry. We got affirmation that the blip was the trend, right? Like, when little things go wrong more than they go right for your team, you're a bad team. You're a bad team, or you're a bad coach team, or you're a bad constructed team. So even if Brian Daboll is not the problem, then Joe Schoen is the problem. And we've all gone through this. Fine, then let's get rid of the GM, bring in a new GM. Is he going to keep the coach that won 2 or 3 games? Of course not, because he's not going to tie himself to that. So it's just such a sloppy process. And I can't believe that we find ourselves in this position again after you turned it over and you went in this new direction. It just, in my mind, and I'm sure you agree, I felt so much that at a minimum, the Giants were going to be a respectable organization again with the hiring of Joe Schoen and of Brian Daboll. And after that playoff appearance, it's been everything but that. And I kind of don't care what you chalk it up to. It just does feel like the team actually perceptually is in a worse position towards the end of year 3 of this regime than they were when they started, than they were under Dave Gettleman for all of his mistakes that he made. That is shocking to me that we'd even be having the discussion about where are we as an organization 4 years later, 5 years later, including the Dave Gettleman run. It's I'm blown away that it's actually still as bad, if not worse.
Yeah, Adam, you were I was nodding my head along because I feel the same way. You're like, I don't know if it's Joe Schoen, I don't know if it's Brian Daboll, I don't know if it's a combination of both, but we're in this mind meld where, yeah, Adam, I think you'll walk me down this path and tell me where you disagree with me on this.
Okay.
Okay. You cannot fire Joe Schoen and keep Brian Daboll. It just doesn't work because a new GM would come in and want their own coach. We couldn't do that, right?
Yeah, I agree.
You could get rid of Brian Daboll and keep Joe Schoen, but if you think that the roster is devoid of talent, you would be getting rid of the wrong person that created this mess to begin with, right?
Yeah.
And then you say, well, we could get rid of both of them, but what is the option that is out there that you are like, without a doubt, no matter what, this GM and this coach tandem is absolutely unequivocally better than what we have in the building today?
Well, I don't know if I'm agreeing or disagreeing here, but I don't know.
That's what I'm saying.
We don't know.
Literally,
like,
you and me are
know.
lockstep. I don't know either. That's to me, that is the bigger question than who's at fault here. I think it's either they both stay or they both go. And I think it's not going to be as much on how they did and what their resume is. It's like Chris Rock says, like, the Giants are going to be only as faithful as the options that are available to them. Like,
yes.
If a GM comes out, right?
No, 100, but I agree. Yeah, yes, yeah, exactly. If there's better options, then hey, guess what? We don't like you so much. If there aren't better options, we still believe in, we think maybe. And then that goes back to the higher level of, well, then do you have to have a 2-year commitment? If they're going to draft the quarterback or not, how do you approach the offseason and all of those things? And I think in the middle of this week, I do want to touch on, because Brian Belichick now is talking to college teams about, hey, what would I want to do here? And what would it look like? Because he wants to coach, and maybe NFL isn't going to come to fruition. But the question of, and we can answer it now if we want to, but just like, would you find it to be concerning if John Mara went and said, like, God, I need to get this thing back on track. I need to stabilize this thing. And he turned to Bill and said, we know the ties. We know your affinity. We love you. You love us. Come and stabilize our organization. I don't know what that would lead to. It might only lead to a handful of mediocre seasons, but it might also lead to like a sense of at least we have a baseline, because that's the thing that we feel like we've lost here over the last decade of this franchise. And I'm not advocating for it, But to your point as well, can you advocate for Brendan Brown to be promoted to GM if you fire Joe Schoen? Is that enough change? Would that be the excuse to be able to keep Brian Daboll if you still think you believe in him? What coaches on the staff are going to be fired? Like Cathco will be gone and Shane Bowen could be gone. All these things you talked about the other day. Shane Bowen has to be gone. Okay. So it's just like we did this before. There's so many question marks and still an ambiguity about the answers for it. And I know a lot of the fan base, either one of two things, believes one, that getting the quarterback, at least, and we've seen this with the Commanders, obviously can dramatically change how you feel about the outlook. But it's not a guarantee that the quarterback becomes a Jaden Daniels or becomes a CJ Stroud, right? So hanging your hat on that one answer, I think, is losing the forest for the trees on all the other issues that exist here. And I don't know what the honest answer is, but what I do know, Andy, is when the early line comes out on the Ravens matchup for the New York Football Giants, and they are a 14-point dog, they only score 0.9 more points than that per game. They barely, on average, can cover the spread that they're going into. So it's just, that is like such an anomaly of NFL competency. It's just brutal. And I know the Sunday game didn't matter, and I know the penalties and all this stuff, but I think you and I keep driving towards like I would clean house. And it's not about whether or not I know what or who is responsible for every little nook and cranny. Sometimes you just feel like, man, this is too messy. This is too sloppy. We got to strip this thing to the studs and then let somebody else try to build it and find out if they're sloppy and find out if they're a mess or not.
You know what, Adam, at the end of the day, I'm with you. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater when things get frustrating, but a report came out of Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, who has turned down multiple head coaching requests from people like the Carolina Panthers and the Tennessee Titans. He has said, no thanks. I don't want dysfunction. It was just reported on Friday that he leaked out. He has 2 requirements in order to meet with any team about the head coaching candidacy. One, I think you'd be interested. One is the head coach needs to be in lockstep with the GM, as in like, I need to make sure that they have the same philosophy as me. It might need to be someone that I already know to confirm that, AKA like, I need to make sure that this person is the person that I am co-signing to be my boss for the next few years. Seems fair. The other requirement, Adam, he needs the organization to admit the mistakes that they have made so that they will not make those same mistakes again. I find that fascinating. If you were to give the Giants truth serum and he says, I need to be aligned to the new GM, and if you want me to be head coach, you have to admit what went wrong. Do you think that the Giants would have the ability to be honest with themselves and sit here and say, this is the reason why we are in this mess to begin with?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because that goes up to the ownership, and this is probably something we talk more in depth as the week and the season comes to a close. Where does John Mara stand in all this? And I don't mean whether or not, has he stuck his nose in some place that you didn't want him to, or do you see the emotional aspect of him losing Saquon Barkley and how that impacts him? But if Ben Johnson comes in and he goes, hey, I'm here to sell myself to you, but I also would love to hear from afar, things have looked absolutely a mess. How do you view the last 5 to 10 years for your organization? If John Mara says, it's been a disaster. Listen, I love Saquon when he was here, but I realized I made a massive mistake not stepping in and stopping us from drafting him second overall because it damaged our ability to build a strong foundation. I've seen terrible allocation of free agent spending. I've seen a misuse of draft picks and that, right? Like if you say that, and I want to have a GM in here that you understand and agree with and has that vision, then I think any coach would walk in and say, great, because I do need to have some sense of control. And by the way, this is one of those occasions when you have that concern about, allocating too much power to a head coach or influence they may have. But that's where this franchise is. You kind of aren't on a position of the Super Bowls with Eli Manning. That cachet is gone. Head coaches aren't coming and go, oh my goodness, Tom Coughlin and the legacy. Sorry, no, like that doesn't mean anything anymore. We've seen you go through 4 head coaches. We've seen you go through multiple GMs. We've seen you be one of the losingest teams in the NFL over these last handful of seasons. Like this is you got to sell yourself to us. You remember talking about like players and free agents saying, oh, they'll want to play in New York. there's no cachet to playing in New York if the product is so bad. No amount of money or marketing accolades is going to matter if you're a part of a dysfunctional organization. And I will leave you with, Andy, a question to ponder. If it is Ben Johnson that is thinking about that, it has ties to Joe Schoen. And some people think, oh, that's the reason that these guys will come back together. Well, why not Ray Agnew, who's been the assistant GM with the Detroit Lions for the past 4 years? Why not, if you're Ben Johnson, you say, hey, I've got a guy who I've believed in and worked with and worked underneath, and I want to bring that tandem over to here. It's a reverse engineering maybe of what Joe Schoen tried to do, but I'm willing to be open to those type of discussions. And, you know, the possibility of what if is always alluring. So I get that's the easy sell. Hey, we suck. Fire these guys. Take a new shot. But maybe that's what it takes, man. If you are a fan who believes, and sometimes we disagree on this, that you have to be, every time you get a chance, you draft a QB, keep firing, keep firing, keep firing. We more believe you need the right quarterback to be your franchise quarterback. Well, shouldn't you have the same, at least some type of discussion if you're the fans of you keep firing on GMs and head coaches until you find the right tandem and you don't get lost in the sauce of disruption and turnover and all those things? That's probably the internal question for John Mara and Tisch, and saying, hey, what do we want to do here? Go down with the ship maybe for another year or two, or pivot and try to build again?
Stability versus futility. Which one is going to win out for the Giants? That is the question, because at the end of the day, Adam, you just mentioned it. The Giants don't want to seem dysfunctional. Is it more dysfunctional to let a coach and GM who are going to have 4 combined wins over 2 years stay and start grooming the next, like, you know, top quarterback? Or is it more dysfunctional to get rid of them and have a whole new regime come in? That feels like the real question that is going to be answered, is which seems more ridiculous, to allow them to continue or to change this thing over again hastily? And the Giants have a lot to think about over the next few games.
Next episode, we come in midweek. We're going to lay it out. Look around the league. Who are the coordinators that would be hot candidates to be brought in as a coach? Would you prefer or like them more than staying the course with Brian Daboll? Likewise for GMs, in-house candidates, outside candidates, old guard versus new young minds. What are the best possibilities here for New York if they are guiding themselves towards having a top draft pick and making a franchise-defining decision in the upcoming draft? We'll do all that on Wednesday. Win or lose. I mean, lose. Always lose. The Giants are going to be losing. But we'll be here on YouTube at One Giant Podcast, on X at Adam Armbrecht, at One Giant Podcast, at AMAC214, on the podcast feed. Subscribe, friends. Tell each other about it. Wrap up a little card that says subscribe to OGP and put it under the tree next to the menorah. However you want to celebrate these holidays, just give the gift of us to everyone else that you know. But until next time, until the best times, as Andrew Mack would want, need, and nay, demand that people know.
As always, let's go Big Blue.